Professor Marco Bozzali, the Foundation San Lucia, Rome, quantitative MRI to characterize functional and structural substrates of music perception and its impact on higher level functions. And I hope you all understand that, and I'm sure we will do by the end of the presentation.
And just a couple of words about our brain. In our brain we have very highly specialized areas, such as the primary motor, the primary sensory area, the primary auditory area, the visual area, the speech, motor and sensory speech areas. But as you can see here, most of our brain is dedicated to the association cortex, which is the anatomical and functional substrate for for developing and using our higher level functions. And MRI, over the last 25 years, has become more and more popular in medicine and in research, not only because MRI is able to produce images from our brain with a very high anatomical resolution. It helps clinicians in detecting pathological abnormalities, but importantly for researchers for this talk is that quantitative MRI is able to provide us with some information about our brain microstructure and functions. And I listed here just the most relevant MRI techniques which are nowadays available, and I will talk just a bit about functional MRI and diffusion imaging. And functional MRI is a technique that allows us to highlight the pattern of activation of our brain when we are engaged in any different tasks, from very simple tasks to highly complex tasks. And the basic of this technique is that when we have increased neuronal activity in some brain areas, we also have an increase of cerebral blood flow, and so an increase of oxygenation. And using appropriate MRI sequences, we are able to detect these changes of oxygenation, and so we are able to basically to localize the brain area which are activated following a specific task. This is the typical experimental setting. The subject lies inside the scanner, inside the board, and there are all equipments around in order to administer the subject with the proper tasks. And we can run many types of tasks. In principle, we have a condition of interest and a control condition. We collect images overall the time, and basically by contrasting the images collected during the condition of interest against the baseline condition or the contrast condition, we can see which brain areas are activated in response to a specific task. And we can run very simple tasks like finger tapping. This is very popular in surgical planning. You can see here a tumor in the red area, and surgeons need help just to remove the tumor, but preserving the principal neurological function. So fMRI can help in this, but fMRI can be used also to investigate higher level functions, such as episodic memory, or visual spatial attention, or also emotion processing, very basic emotion processing, but also complex emotions. We ran this experiment a couple of years ago in our lab. We investigated the functional pattern of guilt feeling in subjects, and as you can see here, we found out that there are some areas which are typically dedicated to emotion processing, such as these red areas here, including the amygdala and the medial temporal lobe areas. But when feeling guilty, the subject activated also some other areas much more related to cognition. And so this is a complex emotion that mixes up emotion processing and cognition. And when going to music listening, in this study, these authors have shown the pattern of activation, administering different types of stimuli, synthetic piano, violin, and human speech. And as you can see here, there are some common patterns of activation, such as, of course, the auditory areas, but there are also differences when subjects listen to speech compared to when they listen to music. And these differences are inside the association cortex. And in this contrast, as you can see here, the blue areas are those which are activated when listening to music, but not when listening to human speech. And looking at the pattern of activation in musicians and in non-musicians, this is a single subject analysis. You see that the pattern is different. Non-musicians predominantly activate the right temporal lobe, while musicians predominantly activate both sides, a bilateral pattern of activation. So musicians have a different pattern of response to music listening compared to non-musicians. But there are also some differences according to the type of music. This is the so-called Mozart effect, which has been described in the literature a few years ago. And in this study, these authors compared the pattern of activation in subject when listening classic piano compared to Beethoven symphony and compared to Mozart music. And as you can see here, in this case, they found out that the pattern activation is much more intense and widespread compared to the other two conditions. But the brain is not just only functional MRI, but is also structural MRI. And using diffusion imaging, we are nowadays able to reconstruct the main tracts, association tracts of white matter, and we are able to investigate some indexes of microscopic integrity within the tracts. And in this study, these authors included two groups of musicians. The first group including musicians who started their training very early, and another group who started learning music later on in their life. And they found out that the early training subject had an increase in this parameter, which reflects a microscopic measure of brain plasticity in this area of the corpus callosum that connects the two hemispheres. And this increase was also inversely correlated with the age at which subjects started their training. And so also the brain structure changes according to the training the subject undergo. And so, in conclusion, quantitative MRI has shown the ability to identify the functional and structural substrates for music perception. This, let's say, higher level function involves not only the primary auditory areas, but also a complex network of association areas. Musicians develop specific mechanisms of brain plasticity, which are more efficient when they start early in life. And all these concepts, I believe, are relevant not only from a speculative viewpoint, but also for clinical application. But I think that Rita Formisano later on will show you some more details in this issue. Thank you very much for your attention.